The next item of business is a statement by Rosanna Cunningham on COP26, our contribution to global climate action. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions at the end of her statement, so there will be no interventions and interruptions. I'll call on the Cabinet Secretary, please.
Presiding Officer, COP26 is a critical moment in the global fight against climate change. Tackling the climate crisis and setting the world on course to net zero within a generation will require a truly international response. The UK Government themes for engaging at COP are adaptation and resilience, nature, energy transition, clean road transport and finance. Climate action is central to the work of the Scottish Government and foregrounded in the aims of business, civil society, academia, industry, youth movements and many others. And this inclusive approach is reflected in Scotland's themes for COP, just transition and people. In Scotland, we have already demonstrated we are committed to delivering world-leading action to tackle the climate crisis. Our landmark Climate Change Act commits us to a 75% emissions reduction target by 2030 and net zero by 2045, which are in line with the Paris Agreement's requirements for nationally determined contributions to reducing emissions by 2030 and beyond. Building momentum towards COP26, our national endeavour to tackle climate change provides a platform for increased global action. Our budget sets out ambitious new measures responding to the global climate emergency. It includes low-carbon investment of around £1.8 billion in 2020-2021, an increase of over £500 million compared with 2019-20. Equally welcome is the £250 million committed to restoring peatlands over the next 10 years, truly a game changer. The Year of Coasts and Waters is an appropriate theme as we journey towards COP. Communities and business across Scotland will showcase our natural environment and wildlife, those elements which are most iconic but also most vulnerable to climate change. And last week we introduced a heat networks bill which will help us meet our climate change targets by regulating heat networks, by increasing investor, supply chain and consumer awareness and acceptance. The Scottish Renewables Conference in March and All Energy Conference in May will showcase both government and industry action to decarbonise the energy sector. The updated climate change plan will be laid in Parliament by the end of April. This demonstrates the increased intensity and pace of activity we will need to move us towards net zero. In the same month, we will also host an online international biodiversity workshop seeking to amplify the voices of subnational governments and ensure concrete action is taken on the twin challenges of biodiversity loss and climate change. In May, the Under 2 Coalition, of which Scotland is a proud member, will celebrate its 5th anniversary. We plan to work with this coalition to showcase the action of subnational governments during COP. Recognising that increased investment needed for the net zero transition is a key part of our action around COP26, we will seek to capitalise on the opportunities this brings. The Scottish National Investment Bank, with its primary mission of a just transition to net zero, is an example of innovative green finance. We are also identifying large-scale investment opportunities suitable for the global market, helping private sector financing become an integrated part of Scotland's net zero transition. Last month, the Independent Just Transition Commission published their interim report highlighting the requirement to put equity at the heart of policy making. Across this year, we will continue to work with the Commission to understand how the net zero transition can create jobs and prosperity, reduce pollution and waste, and improve people's well-being. In summer, we will publish a heat decarbonisation statement setting out the steps needed to reduce the emissions associated with heating our homes and buildings. In September, we plan to host an international land reform conference. Land use is a fundamental part of tackling the climate crisis, and we are working to ensure that everyone can benefit fairly from Scotland's land. And Scotland's annual Climate Week will take place on 14th to 20th September, and our Climate Citizens Assembly will meet for the first time in autumn. This is an important forum as we consider the far-reaching change needed across society and is an example of the way in which people can have their say on climate action. Presiding Officer, COP26 can act as a catalyst to drive forward action by business, industry, local authorities, communities and many others. our focus is on securing a legacy that puts decarbonisation at the forefront of people's thinking. That has been central to our discussions with Glasgow City Council, and I have discussed directly with the council leader how we ensure NGOs, businesses and wider communities are able to get involved. We encourage all partners to seize the opportunity of COP26 to show the best of what Scotland has to offer. Our COP26 platform must be inclusive, involving all sectors. An event that everyone can feel a part of, providing opportunities for young people, communities, and representatives from the Global South to engage. Glasgow has an excellent reputation for hosting large-scale international events. We are working closely with our delivery partners to ensure Scotland delivers a world-class, safe, secure, and successful COP. The First Minister and I have written to the new COP President offering our support. While I've not yet met with Alok Sharma, I do hope to meet him when he visits Glasgow. To demonstrate our commitment to shared working, we have welcomed the opportunity to deploy Scottish Government staff in the COP Blue Zone following initial discussions with the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Presiding Officer, there has been significant media coverage of COP-related cost estimates. These cost estimates will be further refined once the UK provides additional information on planning assumptions. As a result of updated information, the Scottish Police Authority has already revised its estimate for the policing costs to £180 million. The figure is subject to change to reflect evolving operational planning and will also be subject to ongoing review and scrutiny. This additional information has also reduced the cost estimates to the health, transport and justice systems by around £40 million. And I hope that as further detail becomes available from the UK, it will be possible to further refine those costs. I think it's also important to update Parliament on the partnership with the Glasgow Science Centre that I set out to the Environment, Climate Change and Land Reform Committee on 26 November 2019. That partnership was intended to provide a space where the public, business, universities and NGOs could engage with delegates on what is happening in Scotland and to learn more about climate action. In recent weeks, we have become aware that the UK government wishes to use the Glasgow Science Centre as a COP green zone. At their request, we have responded positively to proposals to share the Science Centre. However, I've learnt that in a recent communication with Glasgow Science Centre, the UK government indicated that the opportunity to share the space was no longer available to us, placing the Science Centre in a very difficult position and creating significant uncertainty. We have no desire for this uncertainty to continue. Our position has always been that the climate emergency and COP26 should transcend politics. As a consequence, and in the spirit of partnership, today I have written again to the COP26 President to offer to transfer the control of the Science Centre during COP26 to the UK Government. I have made it clear that this offer is provisional on the Scottish Government being offered an appropriate alternative venue in Glasgow to allow us to showcase Scotland. I have urged the UK Government to conclude this matter without delay. We can then continue to collaborate with the UK Government, Glasgow City Council and our partners to showcase Scotland to the world at this pivotal conference. There have, of course, been questions in recent weeks as to the impact of coronavirus on COP26. I want to assure members that we continue to plan for COP26 to take place, and while advice will evolve, we are continuing to plan on the basis that COP will take place in Scotland. We will, of course, inform Parliament should there be any substantial change in those assumptions. Presiding Officer, we want to use the opportunity of COP26 as a catalyst to attract new investment, innovation and sustainable economic growth for Scotland. We will further harness the will and ambition of the Scottish Government and the Scottish people, firmly positioning Scotland as the world leader it is in tackling climate change.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. Cabinet Secretary will now take questions on the statement. We have until about 3:20, so I call Annie Wells, followed by Claudia Beamish.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and thanks to the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of her statement. I welcome the work the Scottish Government is doing to tackle climate change. Scotland and the UK have some of the most ambitious targets in the world, and I look forward to working with the Cabinet Secretary so we can make sure these targets are met. In that light, I'm glad to see the Cabinet Secretary offer the use of the Science Centre to the UK Government, although I have a few questions about the ongoing relationship between Scotland's governments. First of all, could the Cabinet Secretary confirm that this is the only building where there is a dispute between the UK and Scottish governments? And secondly, when the Cabinet Secretary says that she's expected to be offered an appropriate alternative venue, is this being expected to be offered by the UK Government? And finally, can the Cabinet Secretary agree that these disputes between Scotland's governments won't help us tackle climate change? And we need to see the UK and Scottish governments working together if COP26 is going to be a success.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, of course, working together is what will make COP26 a success, and that is what we are endeavouring to do. I didn't use the word dispute, I would use the word conversation, which is currently taking place about the future of the Science Centre. I would hope and expect that the Scottish Government will be able to secure an alternative venue from whatever source one becomes available. I think everybody in this chamber will accept and agree that there needs to be a place for the Scottish Government to be able to host and offer to others the use of that venue in order to ensure that all aspects of the climate change challenge in the United Kingdom and globally are actually met. That is what this is all about.
Can I just remind members, if you want to ask a question, you'll need to press your button to ask it. Claudia Beamish, followed by Sandra White.
Thank you, Presiding Officer.
You can press your button, Ms Beamish. Don't take that personally.
Okay. Actually, okay. So I welcome the Scottish Government's theme, just transition and people. These are fundamental considerations for Scotland and for abroad in the shift to net zero and the global negotiations. Given this theme and the Scottish Labour Amendment to the Climate Change Act, requiring ministers, I quote, to support people who are most affected by climate change but who have done least to cause it and are least equipped to adapt to its effects, I welcome comment from the Cabinet Secretary on the following. Will the Cabinet Secretary consider committing today to implementing the Just Transition Commission interim recommendations to prevent any further delay? And will she also consider the possibility of further funding to the Climate Justice Fund in the light of the growing scale and depth of the climate impacts on the Global South? The mechanisms for innovative green finance are vital here and globally, as she recognises, of course. And how is the Scottish Government working with the COP President to ensure equity of influence at COP26 so that marginalised voices have the same lobbying and access opportunities as wealthy industries?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Claudia for her question, and her enduring commitment to these issues meant that I could rather have anticipated that she would go into this particular area, quite rightly. We are currently looking at all the Just Transition Commission recommendations, the interim recommendations, and we will be returning and advising Parliament as to our timetable for implementation or otherwise. The climate justice funding issue, of course, is a very important one. We do already provide funding for climate justice work, and you know, our continued commitment to doing that, of course, is in the face of there not actually being an easy fund from which to draw that money, but we do find it and we are increasing it. It's distributed primarily through the Climate Challenge Programme Malawi and the Climate Justice Innovation Fund, which funds projects in Malawi, Zambia and Rwanda, so we try to keep that very focused. I hope the member will accept that continued focus, given the the relatively modest amount of money that we spend is probably the best way for us to actually achieve some result. The issue of climate justice, however, is incredibly important. And I know at COP25 in Madrid, I was approached by a number of people from what might be roughly termed the Global South about their desire to become much more actively involved at all level of COP, the COP proceedings. And I have undertaken to try and be at least an amplifier for that demand. As the member will have heard in my statement, the new president has only just been in place for a very short number of weeks. I haven't had the opportunity to speak directly to him, although, as indicated, there are exchanges of letters. It is one of the issues that I will want to continue to raise with the UK government, because I think it will be a very important marker for COP26 that those voices are heard.
11 members, 13 minutes. So the usual mantra, please. You'll give the first example. Sandra White, I hope, followed by Mark Ruskell.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Cabinet Secretary, COP26, which takes place in my Kelvin constituency, will want to be one of the biggest events hosted in the UK and require much additional resources to deliver a safe and secure event. Has the Cabinet Secretary had any indication whatsoever from the UK Government that will provide Police Scotland with additional resources required?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as a member will be aware, this is not entirely lying within my portfolio, but there have obviously been very serious discussions in respect of Police Scotland. As I understand it, some of the policing support will be brought in under existing agreements, so there will be police from other parts of the United Kingdom being brought to reinforce and support what is happening. But our view is always that the decision to hold the COP in Scotland was a UK decision. Therefore, the costs of that, the core costs of that, should be borne by the UK government, and that must include funding for police. Because obviously the most important thing for us to do is to deliver a safe, secure and successful event. And that extends to fire and ambulance services as well. I do welcome the assurance that there is a process in place to provide scrutiny of financial costs, and I expect that to be ongoing. It will evolve as we get closer, as we understand more clearly what is going to be required.
Mark Ruskell, followed by Bill Kidd.
Previous summits have been heavily sponsored by fossil fuel corporations, while delegates from countries in the front line of the climate emergency, such as Malawi, have really struggled to attend. Will the Cabinet Secretary commit to finding a way to directly support delegates from the Global South coming to Glasgow, while also committing to not sharing platforms with corporations and lobbyists who only want to slow action down on climate change?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I mean, we will continue to talk to the UK government about the necessity, perhaps, of providing some assistance to ensure that people can actually come to COP26 if that is what is required. Of course, I will continue that conversation. In respect of oil and gas and other fossil fuel companies, you know, we recognise that that sector does have an important role to play in supporting the transition to a net zero emissions economy. So it is important that we continue to ensure that they are part of the conversation and not locked out on the other side of the conversation. We need them to help design the diverse energy system that we do need for the future, and that includes options such as hydrogen production and developing floating wind and marine energy. So it is important that we continue to engage with that sector and make sure that they are part of the transition that we require to make over the next 10 years as well as until 2045.
I have to ask people to speed up things a bit. Bill Kidd, followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you very much. Scotland has a strong and specialised third sector working in climate change, climate resilience and international development. What strategies does the Scottish Government have in place to encourage the engagement of climate and international development NGOs in the creation of COP26 events?
Cabinet Secretary.
As indicated, we do recognise the important contribution these NGOs do play in tackling the global climate emergency and meeting sustainable development goals. In recognition of this, we have been meeting regularly with our stakeholders and NGOs, international NGOs, to coordinate activities for a successful and impactful COP26. And we do look forward to continuing to do that work, both up to the COP26 in November and in the legacy thereafter.
Liam MacArthur, followed by Bob Doris.
Thank you. Following on from Claudia Beamis's question, could the Cabinet Secretary advise when she'll be able to update the Chamber on the implementation of the recommendations from the Just Transitions interim report? And will she ask her officials also to engage directly with the Speaker of the National Assembly of Malawi, who indicated to myself and Mark Riscoll last week her determination to see the National Assembly fully engaged with COP26 later this year?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can certainly wholeheartedly agree with the second part of that. My answer to the first part is soon.
Bob Doris, followed by Finlay Carson.
Presiding Officer, I am disappointed at the petulant attitude of the UK Government regarding the use of the Glasgow Science Centre. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to look at the bigger picture and provide more information as to how the Scottish Government intends to showcase Scotland's work on climate change, whether at the Science Centre or elsewhere?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, our intention is to host a programme of events for people and community groups around the summit to ensure Scotland as a whole can show its support for climate action, and also to be able to showcase those aspects of mitigation and adaptation that Scotland is very ambitious on. At the time we entered into our agreement, the Glasgow Science Centre had received no other requests for exclusive hire of the venue during COP. So the Science Centre was entirely and wholly available. Our recent understanding of the completely changed view of the UK Government has obviously changed the conversation around that, and I reiterate that COP26 must transcend politics, and I hope the offer that we have made to the UK Government will conclude the matter without delay.
Finlay Carson, followed by Sarah Boyack.
Agriculture has already shown its willingness to step up to the mark to do their bit. And in their document, Ability for the Platform for Change suggests that an additional £100 million is required for transition. The Committee on Climate Change suggested that industrial clusters could be developed around sources of renewable energy, many of which is in rural areas. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how she intends to rural-proof policy to ensure rural areas share in the benefits and not just the burdens of climate change policy?
I would have to ask Finlay Carson if he's met my colleague Fergus Ewing, who will be absolutely ensuring that the rural economy can benefit very much from the changes going forward. I wouldn't want to step into the agriculture conversation with, in case that I inadvertently say something my colleague isn't happy with. I'm sure I wouldn't, but I want to be on the careful side. But I would respectfully point out, as he probably knows is coming, the enormous game-changing commitment to money in the peatland restoration, he was ahead of me there, will have a massive benefit for the rural economy, as well as for emissions reductions and biodiversity.
Sarah Boyack, followed by Annabel Ewing.
What opportunities will there be for showcasing some of the inspiring best practice from our local councils, public sector organisations such as our NHS, and from our communities at COP26? And what access will such groups have to the summit itself?
Cabinet Secretary.
The first part of that is that we are having serious conversations about COP26 and what might and might not be appropriate to go on there right across the board, as one would imagine with the public sector more widely. I know a number of local councils are very keen to be able to showcase their work, and I met very recently with Orkney Islands Council in respect of that. So that is an ongoing conversation. I suppose for the second part of the question, there is a conversation to be had with the UK Government, the extent to which they allow the doors to open to other actors in this and ensure that they are able to showcase what they want to showcase.
Annabel Ewing, followed by Mollis Golden.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary how the Scottish Government will seek to ensure that the holding of COP26 can both maximise sustainable economic opportunities for Glasgow and for Scotland, and at the same time minimise disruption to the working life of the city and its residents?
Cabinet Secretary.
As the member will expect me to say, there is a considerable amount of work being done into the logistics that will require to be put in place to manage COP26 in the centre of a very busy city in November in Scotland. There are some challenges, there's no doubt about that, but a lot of work is going in to make sure that happens. In respect of being used to attract sustainable economic opportunities for Scotland, this is the largest event of this nature ever to be held in the UK, so we do welcome the opportunity to showcase its exceptional landscape, venues, hospitality, culture, and ensure that visitors experience the very best of Scottish welcome. So we will use it as a catalyst, as I indicated in my statement, to attract new investment, innovation and sustainable economic growth for Scotland. And I hope that that is the message that will go out globally from Scotland as a result of COP26.
Maurice Golden, followed by Rona Mackay.
We all want Scotland to be a world leader in tackling climate change and meet its targets. Will the SNP meet their target of recycling 60% of household waste by the time COP26 comes around?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I'll get back to Maurice Golden on that, but can I gently and with the best possible intentions suggest that perhaps Maurice might want to think a little bit more strategically about COP26 and find a way to rise above an attempt to just make petty party political points.
Rona Mackay, followed by Colin Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Cabinet Secretary outline how young people will be encouraged to be involved in COP26?
Cabinet Secretary,
well,
did you hear that?
We are speaking to a very wide range of people, and that includes young people. We do want it to be an inclusive COP where all voices can be heard. Obviously, young people have been pretty instrumental over the last few years in bringing this to public consciousness. So we're working with partners to develop a programme of activities and events for community and civic engagement to take place before, during and after COP. And I would remind people as well that there is a parallel youth COP which is being run in Italy. I'm not 100% certain how that is going to be managed at the moment, but there is a very active youth COP strand to the work that is being done. But I hope that what we do deliver will deliver, will help to deliver a legacy of climate change awareness in Scotland. There are very detailed, very serious, very consistent conversations about activity around the COP taking place on a very regular basis within the Scottish Government and with our stakeholders.
Colin Smith.
Agree that COP26 needs to involve all of Scotland and should therefore ensure that proposals from communities with the Central Belt, such as Dumfries and Galloway, a region aiming to be carbon neutral by 2025, are back to host delegate visits or affiliate events, so we can not only showcase the carbon reduction assets of that region, but actually make sure that people from across Scotland are involved in a conference, even if they don't travel to Glasgow.
Cabinet Secretary.
That's actually a very important question, and we have been asking, and particularly in areas such as Orkney, Dumfries and Galloway, etc., that there's two sides to that. There's their ability to actually present the good news of what they do to the COP itself, but there's a possibility, and we're trying to explore that, of encouraging some of the visitors to the COP to actually go out to some of these areas and see for themselves some of the very good work that is being done. I know Orkney Council is very keen on that idea, and I would be very happy to speak to any local authority who has particular ideas about how that might be managed. It isn't necessarily in our gift, and these are some of the issues that need to be explored as we move towards November, but it is certainly something that I initially raised as a possibility to put a more Scottish stamp on the COP that would actually encourage people to think about what was available for them to see when they came to Glasgow, and not always just to stay in Glasgow.
Thank you. That concludes questions on COP26. Can I thank the Cabinet Secretary and members who have managed to get all the questions asked and answered. There will be a short pause before we move on to the next item of business.